Okay, welcome back. So we've gone now through our setup stages for seeing and interpreting the head in its position. Right, so we have those four steps of shape, tilt, jaw, cross, and then perspective. So what I'll do now is build that up. Right, so I've gone ahead and set up um, the same views, and I did it for every view in the faces section for this pose in particular. And this is, part of the body's motion, body site that I love because you can see the head, multiple views, expressions. It's a great resource. So I'm going to be doing those views. I think what will be best is I'm going to go through the whole setup just from the front view. That way you'll have the steps and they'll be there. And then the remaining views that I have already laid out, we'll go through those a little bit more quickly each step one by one. And then that way you'll see it develop and how I would modify those steps for different views. Okay, so first thing is I've included here the skull. Again, I'm not going to be drawing it, but the idea or how I'm thinking about it is that this is what I know, right? And of course, we could make the argument I should know it better. This is what I'm seeing. And then the goal of the drawing is to synthesize those, right, into a comfortable or a more practical workflow. Unless you're kind of, let's say, amazing or intense or crazy, it's difficult to approach every drawing by laying in a fully rendered skull and then developing those steps up. So, like everything else that I've done so far, this is all based on the division of labor. So, step five, what I worry about is proportions. And this is a pretty um, basic way of setting up the proportions. It's not by any means something that's exhaustive. And if you're more interested in getting into specific aspects of realism, it may not be the best, but it gets you there. Right? It gets you at least started. Okay, so what am I looking at when I'm laying in my proportions? Well, I already have my T, right? So this we said is the brow line. So that's my brow, and then I have the center line, and those are things I'm going to continue to come back to. But my proportions are always chin to brow. So that's what I start with. So I'm able to take this much here and build a proportion system from it that I find to be pretty reliable. And this is the same one that you can find in Andrew Loomis. If you don't think it's enough, again, I would complement it, right, or supplement it with other books or systems of measurements. So brow and chin are the big ones that I find. And as far as the drawing goes, I already have those. What I do after that is find the base of the nose. And that is always halfway for me, right? I always look for this. So let's say base of the nose or nose at the bottom is a half. And I mostly use halves and thirds just because they're easier for me to make and see. So this wouldn't be the cartilage. This wouldn't be the tip of the nose here. What I'm looking for is that nasal aperture at the very bottom, right? The kind of the bone at the very bottom and center. So if you're looking at a nose, you would see maybe um, the middle, and that would be a good indication at the bottom where you would put that, or the septum, or the cartilage at the bottom, the nostrils, but looking towards the back of it. Okay, so halfway, and then as I move up, and then once we get through this, I'll just lay them quickly onto the drawing. Halfway again. So here's my half. And then I say that the bottom of the sockets, or the turn of the zygomatic bone of the cheek, is another halfway between brow and base of nose. So let's say this is sockets here. Sockets. One more, halfway, gives me the center of the eyes, and then the keystone bone or the glabella, which is this one. So I'm looking for this area here where that ends. It looks like a little trapezoid shape. Um, Most portrait painters I studied with, when they did their drawings, would kind of start with this area, get the spacing in the eyes or the lightness around this area. But that would be one more half. So in the context of a drawing, it's just kind of knocking in halves, one, two, three lines, and then you've mapped out roughly where major landmark areas would be. So again, these are mostly built around visible points or visible areas of bone and how they push against the surface. The bottom, I just use thirds. So let's say we take this whole space, and then I do my best to break it into three equal parts. When I pull these over, and so that first third would give me where the mouth separates or the part in the lips, so one third. And then the second third is, for me, I'll use the top of the chin. So say chin at top, and that way now I've sized out kind of the bottom of the chin and jaw. It's not that these can't change. They can change all the time for variation and likeness, and you may see something vary, and that's good, right? That's fine. This is general. So everything I do is always the most general, the most universal, and then you can modify it to build specifics. In terms of practical application, half, 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 third, third. That's it, right? And if I turn it, it's exactly the same. If I move the camera under and see a distortion in the face, it's exactly the same. Because what I'm using as my anchor points are the brow and the chin. So as long as I can point or find brow and chin, those lines inside or between are always the same. What will make it look different is how much a feature pushes off the front plane of the face. All right, so that is step 5. Step 6, I start to work into articulating a side plane by virtue of cutting some information, oh, not plan, like away. So in setting up the side plane, there's 4 points or 4 areas that I try to look for. So let's put them here in case you want to build this list with me. So my 4 points that I'm going to look for in this step is the hairline, the temple, the back of the skull, and then the base of the nose, or that proportion line of the nose brought around and back. So first is hairline. Not that that's set in stone anywhere, but it's an easy place for me to start to look for where the skull changes. Right? And it's not included in my absolute kind of measurement or proportion system because it's going to vary. But I'm going to guess in this case that it's here. So you're just doing your best at this to observe. Um, Again, one thing to notice is each one of my lines here mimics the same elliptical trajectory. Right? So even if it's a smaller fragment like that, they're all trying to, maybe this one could be pushed more, moving with the structure. So this is the idea of setting up those primary forms and then maintaining them with line. Or whereas obviously if I start to go like this or like that, then it destroys the illusion or that consistency of perspective. What I use the hairline for is that it describes a change in the surface of the skull, right? So from this point up, the skull is rounded, and then all the way around the head, this gets flatter, right, or straighter. Then temple, so we could put one here and here. So what this is helping indicate for me is where the front of the head is starting to turn to the side. And in the photograph, you can see how this gets a cooler color, right, or cooler light. You can see that plane change really clearly here. Base of the nose, I'll pull across because that tells me how tall the skull is. Right? Usually this will, if continued around, will follow and find its way to the base of the skull. And then the last is in your shape, wherever you've indicated that the back of the skull is, right, or nearest point. So what this is an effort to do, if you bring over the hairline, the base of the nose, the temple, and the back, is to allow you target the cutaway portion. Right? Remember I said one of the disadvantages of starting with the sphere is that it's a balloon head, that there's an inaccuracy in the geometry of the shape. So these points target out an area, and then between them, I create an elliptical plane, which I then think of when drawing as a cutaway. So it just helps me find and locate where I think that should be. And then the next step is to, let's say, like slice that off. So this would be kind of a more subtractive aspect of the drawing. So that would be here, just something like this. So when we get to doing other views, what you'll notice that I'll do is take this and then just watch where specifically these points might change, and that'll turn the opening or the elliptical cutout. And then, I could do the same thing on this side. So, practicing drawing ellipses is important. Spheres, obviously, cylinders, anything that has to do with kind of dynamic sketching is a really useful foundation for drawing this way. It's something I still work on a lot, practicing all those things, doing exercises to practice all those things. So the change now is that instead of having this rounded bulbous surface, at this point now, this plane is very sheer, right? It's planar, it's cut off. And so what this line sets up is my next step. As once I find the side plane, I then start to break it up. Right? And the easiest way that I do it is just cut it into fours. So let's say I'm creating a target. And so I'm going to turn this just for a moment. Let's say, for the sake of the argument here, that this is broader. All I'm going to do between the top and then the width is create a horizontal and vertical. So it'll look like that if it was a straight on profile. In this case, it's going to look like this. So there's my vertical, my cut, and then I already kind of did that one. What I use this to help plan out or find is where the beginning of the jaw would be. Right? So that would line up right here, and then where the ear would be. This back quarter is always a great placeholder to look for the ear. That's something that I'll always look for to kind of get the ear indicated. So let's do the same thing on this side. And I think the furthest I'll go really with this is just giving the basic geometric setup of the head and then a very brief geometric description of the features, and then that'll be enough. Right? We won't go through in this lecture or lesson rendering or likeness or anything like that. It's just exercise in playing with perspective and articulating a head and skull.